we'll give it maybe one more minute and then we'll kick off with Harry. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks for setting it up, Grant. Awesome.
What's happening on the golf scene, Tony? Are you all tournament shut?
Yep, we're pretty much locked down. Golf courses in Queensland are shut as of today, and probably the rest of the country the next couple of days. So, yeah, we've been working from home for a couple of weeks.
So you can't even have a foursome by yourself. Oh, not by yourself, but you can't even just organise a non-competitive.
No, not now. We can't. So as of yesterday, with the shutting of pubs and clubs, golf clubs fall under that because they're licensed venues.
Oh, okay. Here we are. Welcome back, Tom.
How's it going?
Good, thanks. All right, we're going to give it, I think it's just ticked over 12 o'clock, so we'll give it one more minute. Looking at all these faces, I think we're all in the same boat. Rob, welcome.
Hi, Jay.
Nikki, how you going?
Hey, good. Right, when I started this up, my dog came and sat next to me.
Own life.
Yes. I've just spoken to the kids and asked them to please not come in. But I think I'm going to be like a BBC guy where the kids come in and Daddy can have yogurt or something like that.
That's why I started laughing when the camera came on.
Alrighty, Tim. So I think we kick this off. Thank you very much for joining. I think we're all looking for some professional development and maximizing what we can do in this downtime. As many of you guys are like, we just got shut down yesterday. We actually thought there was a bit of a loophole because of the last few weeks. Propel has been training outside. We've been maintaining 1.5 meters distance, 4 meters squared, all that kind of stuff. But there's a small little line in the PM's address where it says gyms, indoor sports venues, and the associated outside areas. So that shut us down. And I think we're all in a very similar situation, or will be in a very similar situation for those employed guys. I'd like to welcome Harrison Westbrook and thank him for his time. And just before we get on that, can you guys all just turn off your microphones? Often there's some background noise. Nikki, your dog might start yapping. Put your microphones on mute, that'd be appreciated. And if you're new to Zoom, you'll probably see, depending on whether it's your browser or the app, you'll probably see a little chat button at the bottom somewhere. So if you guys can just, any questions you want, you've got two options. You can ask the question to everyone, or you can just address it to me, or actually to anyone in the chat. So if there are any questions, Harrison has said he was open to answer as much as he can. I've got my chat box open. You can see, you can either address everyone or myself specifically, and I'll answer the question. And then at the back end, we might open up the microphones or have a little bit more Q&A. So just a quick introduction. Harry and I met back at I was strength and conditioning coach at Brisbane Boys College. He was a rower then, and went on to represent Australia in the under-23s, so pretty high-level rower. And then when Nudgy were looking for a strength and conditioning coach, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, Harry can correct me there. Six years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. The rowing director and I had worked together, and it was a pretty easy decision on who to go for to fill in another great strength and conditioning coach, Jake Winwood. So Harry, welcome, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, G. No, should be good.
Okay. So let's start off with this. So you were an elite athlete representing Australia under 23s. Tell us a little bit how that affected your decision to become a strength and conditioning coach.
Yeah, it was funny. Like I always wanted to work in sport, and I knew that. I was quite obsessed with it growing up. Like I didn't have a lot of interest necessarily outside of it. And I just loved all sports. So whether that was rowing, golf, rugby, cricket, like didn't matter what was on. I always wanted to watch it and sort of be associated with it. And then as I sort of went through high school and started getting exposed to S&Cs and those guys that are helping athletes perform, I sort of had a bit of an inkling that's where I wanted to go. And then obviously then after school where I really really started training, properly, I really found what was happening there really quite enjoyable. I was really interested in it. So not only was I studying it, but I was also being taught by some actually really good S&Cs that are now all over the place. So it's been quite, I found that quite enjoyable. And then obviously again, as you just got more in depth and you got higher up the ranks, you got exposed to greater knowledge in that area. And then as you were studying it, I was experiencing it on myself, but then also started coaching it a little bit on the side whenever I can, or wherever I could, just to get a little bit of experience. And so I was sort of experiencing all angles, I guess. So I was experiencing it from an athlete's perspective. I was getting some coaching in on the side, and I just found that was, and then I was obviously studying it. So from there, it just sort of grew and grew, and then I started getting a bit of momentum and doing more and more with it. And the more I did, the more I wanted to know, and it just becomes a bit of an endless pit when you start to enjoy it. The areas you can look at and there's things you can study. So that's, I guess, the point that I liked the most is that it wasn't, S&C wasn't stuck to one area. You could go across multiple sports, and that's where I sort of got it. That was one of the big things that appealed to me. As I said at the start, it's all sports were the things that got me interested in the area.
All right. Okay. Awesome. So just go back to those first few days. So, you were doing part-time S&C work, and then next thing, in a very short amount of time, and if I remember correctly, you hadn't even graduated yet, you were heading up a private school, a GPS, one of probably the most prominent sports schools we've got in Queensland, heading up their program. What was that transition like?
Daunting, but at the same time, it was. I didn't feel like I was not ready for it. I felt like I'd sort of put in 4.5 years as an assistant, from casual, just all throughout uni. So I left school in 2008, and then in 2009, I'd picked up some casual sort of work at BBC, and a fair bit of that was unpaid, but then I got to it, and so I had sort of 4.5 years before I got the full-time role inside a school system, inside that setup. I had the experience. I knew what schools were kind of looking for. I knew how they prioritise sport, where it ranked inside the schools, and especially inside the GPS, as a GPS association. So I had a bit of a leg up there in that sense. But then moving to full time, it was kind of weird. Like I had to quickly make a decision whether I wanted to keep rowing, or whether I wanted to go full time into a career. So that was a pretty simple decision, I think, in the end. I was sort of starting to just waver in a little bit of my passion for my sport. So I found that quite easy, a bit of an easier decision. So I think that the transition didn't feel as hard as I thought it was going to be when I first got there.
Because the systems were so similar and the domain was so similar, it was easy to transition.
Yeah, absolutely. I just had more time doing what I wanted to do. So that's what was the best part about it, was the experiences I'd had prior in assistant roles. It didn't necessarily feel daunting. The one thing I did struggle with at the start was throwing ideas around at people, because when I first got here, I was the only one.
So when you say throwing ideas, so this is bouncing ideas like before you implement them. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, correct. So what I had prior to getting this full-time role is I had a couple of assistant coaches. So it was me and two other guys. And we just had constant discussions before gym, after gym, trialing ideas, reading programs, finding ideas and then either trialing it or just experiencing it, and whether we thought it worked, whether it didn't work. And then obviously I had someone above me who I could sort of sit down and as a bit of a mentor and throw ideas and show them my programs and what's going on. And I was able to share that with those guys. But when I got here, I didn't have that as accessibly. So I had to go reach out a bit more. So I had to get on the phone and via emails and really trying to, it wasn't just happening naturally. I had to go find it.
Mm-hmm. And so just expanding on that, because I don't think people realize that when you're at the top of the tree, it is hard to, you most of the ideas that you're bouncing are, for want of a better term, you're bouncing them down, you're bouncing them to people who have less experience than you. So what are some of the strategies that you did to say, hey, I've got to get out of my comfort zone, I've got to get out of my echo chamber and stay fresh, stay current, and stay alert?
Yeah. One of the biggest things was actually just scheduling regular coffee chats, basically. So the one thing I knew was, as we all work, it was kind of a split shift at Nudgy. So I knew I was busy till about 10 o'clock. I didn't have to do anything associated with the PE program or anything along those lines. So then I had a chance to then get out for an hour or two to go catch up with people. And that was just reaching out through my contacts and through guys like yourself and people from all over the place, reach out and try and find ideas through there and just see what, and just ask questions really. I'd bring programs. I would try and use it as much as I could. Again, my aim at the time was trying to get one a week, and that quickly, that didn't always happen, but sometimes I got 2 a week. And then the idea was I would always make the effort to go over there rather than making them come out to Nudgy, which is north side of Brisbane, is a bit of a way away. So that's what I sort of looked at, just trying to get, making myself available and making it easy for the other person.
Okay, so you're at the top of the tree, you kind of, you're running your own program. Over the last few years, what do you wish you'd known back then, 6 years ago? What do you wish you'd known?
It's always a hard one, that one. I think if I had my time again, just how little the science plays in school-based S&C programs. Now, that's not saying it doesn't at all, but it quickly gets thrown out the window when you got 50 kids all at differing abilities. You got 18-year-olds and then you got 12-year-olds in the same space, and you got 50 of them or 40 of them. Like, it's very difficult to write individual programs for that many guys. And so what I found was I was putting lots and lots and lots of time, especially early on having these elaborate, really nice programs. And it took me probably 2 or 3 years to figure out that it all gets thrown out the window and doesn't look neat anyway. So let's just try and get them engaged and being consistent with their training and enjoyable and coming back. And we get more out of that than anything else. So that was the big thing for me, was probably the science. Not that it doesn't matter, but it didn't matter as much as creating an engaging program and an enjoyable program that all kids want to come back, not just the elite sporting kids.
All right, well, let's expand on that. So what were some of the strategies? Where would the science maybe conflict or differ or vary from the fun, the culture, the enthusiasm, and the engagement? Yeah,
a simple and the easy one that always comes to mind is when you're trying to introduce some power-based work.
Yep.
So, we're always trying to get the power stuff done generally at the start of a program, You got 40 kids lining up for whether it's, if you're using it, for example, gym aware, or if you're trying to do power stuff, just some broad jumps or vertical jumps. You can't have 50 guys lining up for that necessarily at once. So you've got to try and find interesting ways to get around it, or maybe it doesn't start at the beginning of the program. It's got to be somewhere else in the program. You've got to find other ways around it. So, so an example, I guess that's the way I sort of do it is if I'm doing some lower body power and the group's having to be split up, it'd be things like the other guys. So some guys might start on their lower body power. The other guys are going to go do the upper body part of their gym program. And then their legs are still a little bit fresh when they're coming into that power-based work. So again, just things like that. And then how do you have to, and the other simply progress and regress exercises. So as I said, you got to have 40 kids in the gym and you're trying to you've got barbell bench press, but some kid has never done it before, and there's one coach or two coaches. How do you spend the time with this one guy without watching the zoo happen behind you? So how do you progress and regress that side of it? So I guess for me,
using that as an example, can you tell us what you might do or what strategies you might do to regress, progress the bench press or whatever exercise you want?
Yeah, so just simple, I keep it really, really simple. So we'll have a couple of level-based things. So we might do a body work. So it starts with the push-up, okay, teaching them through the push-up. Again, that's a pretty basic exercise. It's pretty simple, and you just add in some little things like do it on the bar. Your chest has to touch the bar. Then from there, you're getting rid of the range problems. They know they just have to touch the bar. That's just a simple thing. And then obviously I just start to increase some through dumbbells, but I'm not too fussed whether they start dumbbells before barbells. It doesn't really bother me too much, but it's more of a safety thing. We know if they fail on a push-up, they're going to fall, 4 inches. They're not going to fall. They're not going to have a weight crushed on them. So just some little things along those through that safety aspects that we look at. So that's how do we coach it? We generally try and I'm lucky now to have a bit more coaches, but I try and group a few guys. So there might be a number of guys grouped together and they'll all just do push-ups together. So there might be some inside that group. There's obviously differing levels, but the older guys in that bottom group, for example, if they're doing push-ups, we can just start to load it or add a band to increase that difficulty.
Yeah. So does that bring it back to your programming, making sure that what I'm hearing is you might be more template-based than actual program-based?
Yeah, for our general, what we call our general users. So I guess probably taking a step back, often what we get squad-based things. So for example, our first 15 rugby program or our first 8 or something like that, they're all generally pretty close to each other. They're all fairly good.
Close in terms of athleticism.
Yeah, in terms of athleticism, they're fairly close. But then we've also got open gyms, which we call general users. So anyone can come in, just work on their health and fitness, and that's where we get those disparities. Where we've got guys in off-season programs that have done gym for 5 years, or we've got, a year 6 kid walking in who's just got excited because he's just come to the school and he's seen this, great facility that they wanted to use and it's got access to. So that's sort of where I guess that squad is where we sort of use it a bit more, where we're utilising, where we see the differences across the board.
All right. Yeah. So it sounds like you guys use a philosophy at Propel we call earn the right. So yes, you can bench press if you want, but there's a whole bunch of steps you need to get there, which then deloads our coaching load because you've done that. So then we only have to coach one thing to do that, and it kind of progresses like that. Is that something that you?
Yeah, absolutely right. That's absolutely right. With our younger programs, that's exactly how we do it. So we've got a level-based program, exactly sort of as I was explaining, in our squads, and they'll all start. So while we're actually right on the board, it'll be, today, so 1A, you got squats, 1B, you got horizontal push. So I won't necessarily say you got push-ups or you got bench press. It just gives you the movement. And then based upon that, they're getting assessed up and down based upon that and that's another sort of younger program. So again, we know that everyone matures at a different age. So we've got kids walking in here that are some have already done some fair bit of work, or some have just grown older and they've push-ups are really easy for them. So that's how we just sort of progress it. And we have it sitting up in the gym, accountability, I guess, so that the kids know exactly where they're at any given point. And the same thing, we know that sort of fluctuates. So one week they may have progressed from push-ups into you know, a dumbbell, like a loaded push-up or a dumbbell bench. Okay, but just because you've gone it 1 week doesn't mean you're going to be there in 2 weeks' time, because if you're really struggling with that, we necessarily might bring you back down. So it's a constant assessment, moving up and down where they're at.
And who's making that decision? You, your coaches, or them?
Coaches. The coaches in on the program, so they're who are running the program.
So your coaches have to be crystal clear on what your regression progressions are, and they've got the decision-making ability to be able to push or withhold.
And we try and make it advertised quite clearly for the boys as well. So for the boys to read. So, you know, we might write on the program, so it'll go squats. Underneath that, they'll have, so you just got your levels. So it'll be body weight squat into goblet squat, into front squat, into back squat, and they'll just be written underneath the exercise. And they just know whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, whichever level they are, and they'll be ticked off on a sheet that's sitting on the pylon in the gym for everyone to see.
Okay. Now, Nudgee College has an unbelievable reputation in rugby. You guys are premiership winners or thereabout for the last few years. Same thing with rowing. You've got an unbelievable coach there and an awesome program. But there's also, typically at a school, so your two primary sports are rugby and rowing, I'm guessing. But there's also sports that you'd love to get hold of. I don't know what Nudgees might be. It might be tennis. I know from my experience, football or soccer can be a tough one to get in the gym. What strategies have you used to get those non-weight training, strength and conditioning, athletic development programs into the gym and try have them access your expertise?
Yeah, it's a hard one because there's a lot of them that, not a lot of them, there's still a couple that don't use it. So, for example, our basketball program still struggles and our volleyball program is very sporadic. So they're two sports straight up that we struggle to get in. I guess a good example is what we've been able to do with our football program probably over the last 12 to 18 months is we've always struggled with football. A couple of reasons. The training demands is quite different. So I guess to progress through the representative ranks, it's all done through clubs. Whereas if you look at rugby programs, it's actually done through the schools. So the external clubs have a lot of say. And so they might train 4 times a week. But we're trying to get our guys in there and trying to do a bit more. And how much low can you just keep throwing at them? So you've obviously got to be quite smart.
And so just on that, so are the clubs developing the athlete or are they developing the football player?
Football player. They say they're doing the athlete, but they're not.
Okay. So they are going to just do everything with a ball or whatever it is, and then you can say, "Yep."
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. Why it is quite frustrating for us, and including our football director, is that we can offer a lot more than what those clubs can do. You know, we've got access to more coaches. We've got access to exciting pieces of equipment and things like that, and actually have a better system of tracking them and helping them and individualizing them. So that's what's frustrating. We're starting to get some actually really good traction with that. Not fully, but we're getting some good traction with that. And back to your first question, how did we do it? Well, one of the best things I did was actually just I found some presentations done by an Arsenal group. So the guys in the Arsenal Academy, and when I guess you show them what the best groups are doing, and you've got some evidence, and it's not necessarily always the best way, but it's a way I found that helps really well, finding out what they're doing, and then the coaches get a little bit excited. Oh, this is actually how they're doing it. Well, we must do it that way. It's a bit of a copycat sort of system, which again is not perfect, but we've tried other things that sometimes it's literally just showing them what other people are doing, and they get a little bit jealous and they want to do it as well. And especially when we've got the resources to be able to do that stuff, it makes it more frustrating. So I guess that was probably the biggest thing with our football program and how we got that back into the gym, was showing them through videos, showing them through presentations, online courses, showing them this stuff.
Already through a process of social proofing. If Arsenal are doing this or Manchester United are doing that, hey, we should be doing the equivalent for similar sort of age and development kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not copying necessarily what they're doing, but letting them feel like they're at least we're moving in that same direction. You know, we're never going to be able to do, and I don't necessarily agree fully with what the Manchester Uniteds and things are doing with their 9-year-olds. But there are some good programs out there that really do progress the athlete, not just the football player, and showing them how we can do that. You know, how can we do that with a 10-year-old? How can we do it with an 11, 12, 13-year-old? And that progressive work.
So that's worked well with the football program. How come that hasn't worked with the basketball program?
It's a hard one. Basketball for us falls at the same time as our rugby program. So
resources?
Sorry?
So it's a lack of resources then, or?
It's not a lack of resources. It's some of the coach philosophies as well. So with some of those guys, we've got the older guys. They just need to be on court playing more basketball. You can show them the evidence, but sometimes it doesn't necessarily go through. And again, that could be some of the stuff that I'm not doing, and, not being open enough. But at the same time, we're also so busy that, after a few attempts, 4 or 5 attempts, I'm not going to keep trying to waste my time with it because I am so busy with other things. And if I try and bring another football program in, like an example is we get about 400 to 500 kids a week come through the gym, not including HPE programs and certs and fitness and all that sort of stuff, not including staff members and things like that. So there's so much
pure athletic development before and after.
Pure athletic development, we're getting 400 to 500 kids come through a week. So you just end up.
Sorry, just for a point of reference, how big is Nudgee High School?
So that's a third of the school. So we got 1,500. Okay.
And when you say 400 to 500, so that could be slightly less because some people are coming Tuesday, Thursday, or is that 400?
Yeah, it's not. So across a year, we have about a third of the school come into the gym.
Okay.
And this is a few other issues. We've got about a third of the school that comes in, and it's about 20% of the school, I would say, uses it effectively.
Okay.
So obviously, some of those visits will be once or twice, across a year. That's pointless, So that's, I guess, some basic numbers on that. Sort of diverted there. So, but yeah, that's I guess. And the problem is that we're at the limit in the sense of what we can actually effectively coach in here. So we have to find other ways of doing that. So field-based training sessions. We're starting to introduce some other things like adding an external party through, maybe Pilates or something along those lines. Having other programs running at the same time, and obviously with that comes the need for more coaches because you're needing. So rather than having 2 coaches in the gym, they're needing 1 in the gym and 1 in another space.
So that kind of brings me to my next question now is, as you're talking about needing more coaches and stuff, what would you be typically looking for in those coaches? What education, what experience, and what sort of interpersonal skills would you be looking for to either grow your team, or what have you done to grow your team to where it is now? Yeah.
Well, the first thing I look for is actually how proactive are they? I guess for me, as the learnings, as I said at the start, is knowledge isn't the most important thing in a high school program. You can develop it, absolutely. And I find that's one of the easier things to develop is your knowledge and the science, I guess, behind it. What I do find is just, being energetic and proactive are the 2 main qualities I'm looking for in my coaches, because too often I've had uni students or prac students come in and they just sit in the corner and like they tick the box, they're in, they're out, they're in 2 minutes before the session starts and they're in the minute after the session finishes. And they're in between, they're sitting there with their hands, arms crossed. That's not engaging. And I think going back to what we were talking about in the past, that's not going to get a kid wanting to come back and getting a kid engaged in the program. So I'm looking for people that are getting involved. I think we've spoken about this before, but if you don't know what you're doing, just help a kid put some weights away. and have a conversation with him. And then it just becomes a bit more natural in that sense. So that's what I'm looking for, being proactive for the people coming in the doors and not just sitting in the background. We're not working with, $1 million athletes or whatever. Like, you don't need to, have a conversation with them. Don't like that. They're good kids. Like they will talk back. So, getting engaged and getting to know them and helping them, and just being proactive throughout the workspace, I guess, is a big thing.
Okay, so you're saying you rate the interpersonal skills highly. Are there qualifications that you either think are necessary, or I've had a situation where I know the organization that's delivered the education, and I've actually used that as a red flag to not employ. So do you have a qualification that you think is a necessary thing for a young coach? And do you have others that are, hey, I'm going to stay away from this because I know the kind of person they produce?
Yeah, I think for me, like, whether you've got it or you're completing, you're late on the piece with your undergrad. You've obviously got to have that for us, and that's a school-based system that we have put in. Now, you don't necessarily need to have completed it, but you need to be getting close to it. So your third, fourth year, that's sort of what we're looking for in that sense. And then we push for just simply ASCA accreditation, and then that sort of shows me a little bit that it's actually an area you want to keep going. So a lot of people want to work in a high school setting and working at Nudgy and things like that, but they don't necessarily actually, after maybe a year or two, they start to find, I don't really like, or no, I'm not getting a full-time job straight away, or I'm not getting this and the other, and then they just go straight away. Like, as soon as it starts to get a little bit difficult, they try and find another out, another option, and they'll go down something completely different. Like, I've had people that go down business, they've done their undergrad and they're like, oh, I like working with this stuff, or I like gym myself, but I don't really like the work hours, or I don't really like, I don't really like coaching it. I just like doing it, for example. I like lifting weights, but I don't actually like doing it, coaching, So for me, if you're going to invest in yourself a little bit with that, doing an ASCA level 1, ideally, I'm always pushing for level 2. It obviously it's a bit more thorough, and you start to get a bit more recognition, and you can start to then move through some. It just shows me that you're interested in this area, and you're willing to go invest in your own education a little bit.
And so, just on that, what would your advice be to any coach that graduated recently, within a few years, whatever it is, and they've kind of hit that bottleneck where they're still doing some part-time stuff, they haven't got the full-time gig, they're making things work through living at home or packing shelves or whatever it is? What would your advice to them be, both from a professional development point of view and an experience point of view?
Yeah, that's always a hard one, because you've obviously got to have your money to live, right? And so you can't turn that down. So, and the hard thing we've got in our industry is obviously the ability to use or to get money and to get that to get that source of funding and enough to live. So my thing is I don't, and again, we've spoken about this. Like, I've got my master's degree, but I don't think it's necessity for a young person to go straight into and do it. It's that experience and finding out how to do it. And for me, coaching anyone is better than coaching no one. So, I think we've got a really negative opinion of like personal training in our S&C industry, especially, if I'm doing personal training, I'm not working with professional athletes. I'm working with mums and dads, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Because even the kids that work in here, you've got guys that go on and play Super Rugby the next year, or play in the Bronx, a couple of years later. But you've got kids in here that just want to do some health and fitness and keep themselves active. So to me, you've got to have that full wide spectrum, or at least be exposed to it. And so for me, I'm always about coaching as much as you possibly can. So if that means having a personal training side gig, I think that's very much a positive. The more, and I always push for getting money in an industry or an area that's going to help. So, I understand coin is necessary, but, if you're going to have the choice of working in Woolies or going in and working in, even if it's something like Rebel, for me, I would always try and pick something like Rebel. You might get a little bit more knowledge in things like on running shoes. You might start to understand the technology inside that area a little bit more, or the ability to actually sell and sales inside something like Rebel, where you get a commission-based system a little bit. So I think that's really important. So using other funding or other areas that are going to actually give you some more skills.
Yep.
So whereas if you're just working in Woolies, you're just behind a checkout and just ticking a few things through, I don't necessarily know if that's going to give you too many other skills apart from, and I could be wrong, maybe some more personal interaction skills through communication to everyone. But outside of that, I think, picking jobs that will help you grow in other areas. Again, through sales or something like picking up some of that sort of side of it.
All right, cool. Now, I'm going to ask you some more questions, but just to the group, if you guys got any questions, please feel free to just text them through that chat, and I'll ask Harry as we go along. So feel free to use that option. Harry, one of my concerns, and I was actually a big part of this problem when I was at Brisbane Boys College, similar position to what you're in now, in an attempt to be professional and try bring high performance into the school. I think I ended up, one, pampering the kids because I was trying to do too much. And two, there was this emphasis, and I think I got, I think I was blinded or maybe overly focused on, winning, because that was my job, is to try and get a premiership or try and win head of the river for your rowing 8 or whatever. How do you find that you balance, hey, this kid has got a long-term professional or potential professional career, but your job, you're getting paid to help win a premiership. How do you balance that?
Yeah, that's it's a very hard question, and I don't think we always get it right, if I'm honest. I think we get it wrong quite quite regularly. And the big one I think you touched on there is pampering the kids. We've got big budgets here, and we can look after them very easily. But I guess from the pampering side, we put a lot of ownership, especially when they get to year 12, that things like parents aren't communicating with us. It's all through the kid, the individual. So at least developing some other skills is some areas that we put in there to make sure that they're interacting, learning to grow in that sense as a person, not just relying on mum and dad, which can happen quite regularly here. Obviously, the younger kids are different, but the older kids as they get older. So that's probably more from that side of it. I've tried certain areas. We put some ownership on them and then some accountability things. So for example, we do have GPS units on our boys, and Nikki does a good job with that. So we'll give them the $100 vests that sits, or whatever it is that sits, that they wear, and they keep ownership of that. And then if they lose it, there's an accountability on them. There's or forget it for a session. There's an accountability aspect to it. So it might be an assault bike later on in the week. It might be they've got to pay the $100 if they lose it or rip it or whatever that is.
Sorry, just to bring you up, so Nikki is...
So Nikki looks after all our GPS and sports science-based programs.
Mm-hmm.
So she's on here somewhere. I can't see her, but yeah.
That's Nikki. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So she looks after all that side of it. So again, and that's an area that where we feel that we can actually get some more so understanding of what the game demands are. That's more what we're using it for. Not trying to replicate what they do at a super rugby level. That's more what our focus is on, is actually getting information and then trying to tailor our training programs based upon what we're seeing in our games, not just grabbing what was done at the top and then replicating it, which is often done, I think, at high schools. And I've definitely done that myself, So that, again, if that's really answers your question, but it definitely, it's really easy to pamper the kids when you've got coaches, you've got funding, You know, you've got all this stuff, so it's easy to do that. The other point I say on that is sometimes the kids don't know how to do it unless you show them as well. So for us, sometimes we find that, I guess sometimes we find you need to show them and then step back and then let them make the errors again. So you can't necessarily expect them to know what to do without showing them what to do. I don't know if that really makes sense, but you might need to pamper them first.
Expand on that.
Sorry?
In what context are you talking about if you don't show them?
So, well, let's just take like, I don't know. So you say you use physios. Let's take a physio for example. So we've got a physio that comes on site. So the first one, I'll set up how to book a physio appointment with them, and I'll go do that myself for the first time.
Yep.
What I then expect later on is that once I've shown you how to do it, and we've had that communication process, you're then the one going and doing it, not necessarily me.
Yep.
Now I will help them, and that communication process is big, but they'll still let me know. But in the end, they're the ones that are having to go do it.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, got you. Yep.
Yeah. So you show them how to do it, and that's just an example. And that happens all the time in a whole bunch of different areas. You know, through along those lines. And that might just be a simple communication thing, or how to understand their GPS data, and that we show them at times and things like that.
This is a genuine question. So, with your GPS data and all the sports science, and Nikki, this is no disrespect to you, but how much does that influence your decisions compared to a well-trained coaching eye?
Yeah, so absolutely. We don't make an awful lot of decisions off the GPS. More so because we're still trying to find out. Like we're still trying to find out what are the game demands, what are the things. Like we're probably 18 months, 2 years into this, but we're doing it with a consistent bit of information. Problem is we only play 8 games, so it's actually hard to get a proper take on it, or what actually is going on. Always the coaching eye is always taking precedence. And, you know, we'll do some little things where we emphasize, so we emphasize sort of just basic sort of periodization using off that, and that will help the coaches guide that. And then we'll give coaches information on what drills were good into helping do that, so that we can then sort of peel back on things like having to do straight line conditioning stuff. We can try and do it with a footy in our hand and things like that. So more guiding the coaches in the sense of if we need to do more, if we're not doing enough.
So does that? It almost sounds like your GPS and your sports science is more of a coach development thing than an athlete development thing. Would that be a fair comment? Yeah,
absolutely. I think that is, and in the end, our coaches are the ones that are influencing our athletes. You know, I think if we can get our coaching and our drills better, so where it's ticking off things like, you know, are we getting enough conditioning stimulus out of them? Yes, but are we also making decisions under fatigue? You know, like I think for us, it's about how do we do that? And at the start of a season, it might be very much, it's not organic. So we will go and run them straight away, and then we go and ask them to do the skills under fatigue.
Yeah.
But later on in the season, we're hoping to try and really pull away from that conditioning based drills and going into using drills that are also educating them on their game.
Yeah.
So I guess that's where we're trying to head. And again, I don't think we do it perfect yet, absolutely. But that's where we're trying to hit. And at the moment, our coach actually loves conditioning. He thinks it's a big part of the game. He's a bit old school in that sense. But he actually wants us to keep including conditioning into it, because it really helps him. He goes on about the mental side and actually really pushing that end and the competitiveness. It's to make that, you're racing against another bloke for the same position, things like that. So he pushes for that. So, yeah.
All right. Well, it's interesting you say that because we've got Daniel Cooper tomorrow, and I think you know Coops pretty well.
Yeah.
He's going to talk about the mental toughness and a bunch of other things. So if you guys want to tune into that. Now, we've got a question from, sorry guys, we're just playing around with the lighting over here, but we've got a question from Charles. So Harry, with the Elite Performance Program, how do you balance your school's program with their elite pathways, both from a physical perspective, so global workloads, and a mental perspective from where you have multiple coaches in their ears telling them, potentially different tactics, technique, and so forth? What do you guys do in that situation?
So I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think maybe you're talking about the football program where we had guys at a club level to the pathways.
Is that perfect? Yep, that's it.
Yeah. So it's a really hard one. So what we do there is I just get in contact with the coaches from those programs, and it might not necessarily need to be me, because as I said earlier, there's not necessarily an athlete development process in those clubs. They say there is, but there isn't really. So what we do is we have conversations with our football coaches. We're educating them on those certain areas, and then and they're the ones talking with the other coaches from those other clubs. As I said,
but just as a matter of interest, so who reaches out to who? They recognize as being the high.
We're always reaching. It's always us. I think in 6 years I've been here, I've had one club reach out to us. Okay. And when I say club, that wasn't even, so who was it? So like even the Reds, yes, even the Reds don't do that. And, generally 4 to 5 of our guys each year will go straight into their academy. Yeah. Now, to be fair, they're trying to be better. They're trying to be better. I will give them that. I wouldn't say it's there yet. And that's not sort of big knowing ourselves, because I don't think we do it very well yet either. That communication across the pathways. So a lot of the time it's just through the kids and through the communication through them, actually finding out how they're feeling, how they're pulling up. So often we're getting their schedules and trying to match it up as best as we possibly can. It's not going to be fit for everyone because everyone's at different clubs and things like that. So it's not perfect. So football's not a great one in that sense. But we've got ideas where we're trying to have a big day for our young guys. So an example is our junior football program. So our little young guys. So they're still training ridiculous amounts for a 10-year-old. But what we will do is, rather than training a number of times throughout the week, we have a big block on a Friday afternoon. So they'll go and do some field training for about an hour and 15, and they come up to the gym.
For 10-year-olds?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then that's a good session. The clubs are doing 90 minutes plus. So they'll then come into the gym, and then they'll do sort of a 30-minute sort of gym session. We then feed them, and then they go home.
So the school provides the food?
Sorry, you just broke up on me there. Say it again.
So who provides the food?
They do. So it's a bit of a. So we do as part of our program. This is the only group this happens for. So this is not a normal situation. But for those guys, and then after the food, they'll end up they'll do like they'll go play some games of some sort. So sometimes they might go and play. Like we've had things where they've gone and played AFL. These little kids go play AFL, or they'll go play handball or something like that. They just have some play after food, and then they go home after that.
So communication is obviously key for managing the workload. What happens getting back to Charles' question, what happens from that mental perspective where your coaches or you want them to develop one set of things and their clubs or the other people are, how do you manage that? How do you prioritize that?
So for us, especially in the early seasons, a lot of our stuff is not based upon, we're not teaching the kids shape and structures. So let's use the football program. We're not doing heaps and heaps of stuff on shape and structures. We're doing lots of skills. So things that are going to get them better on the football is the way I guess you want to call it that. So just basic skills. So I'm not great with football. Nicky spends more time down there than with me, and one of our other coaches does as well. So, but let's say if I use the rugby examples or something like that, that we're doing lots of things of teaching them how to pass, teaching them how to tackle. It's not teaching them how to get into different shapes and structures and necessarily lots of line-out calls and things like that. It's actually, and all these nice, tricky, fancy moves, it's actually about setting that up. It's actually learning the basic skills and how we do that. And a good thing about some of our programs, and especially through the rugby program at the moment, is we've got certain tick boxes that the coaches for the younger age groups have to do. So, you know, that's, as we take an under 14s, they need to be able to spiral pass left and right.
Yep.
It doesn't matter what position. They don't necessarily need to be able to kick, but they need to be able to pass left and right. You know, something like that. They've got little things by under 15s. They need to know how to tackle. So there's tick boxes the coaches are expected to have done throughout the season. Now we do add little things in there on top of it, because if it's all like that, the kids lose engagement, right? So we've got to add other things in there that are going to get them, where we add in like little structure things later on in the season, which then goes back to your point of how do we balance the weighing up of winning with learning. So a big portion of our pre-seasons and even a lot of our in-season sessions are done on skills in the younger age groups. And then later on the piece, we'll then start to teach them how to play the game, I guess, if you want to call that, through structures or what have you. So that's how we balance that. So that side of it. But then with our football programs, we do a lot of skill-based stuff, except for maybe our first 11, which, you know, and again, this is whether we've got this right, that balance of winning versus like development. And then we delve into the long-term athlete. There's still a fair bit on, there is actually a bit on structure. But having said that, if we've done our jobs right in the under 15s, 16s and whatever, hopefully they've had years of developing those skills so that they're at a pretty high level anyway, that we then can start to progress them.
Yep.
I guess that then comes back to how we do it in the gym, is that by the time they've got to a first program where the big focus is on winning, the main focus is on winning, they've developed they've had 4 or 5 years inside our gym programs that they've had a chance to develop and learn from. They've learnt the skills, and then we can start to do, I wouldn't say fancy stuff, because we don't really do too much fancy stuff with our guys in the older age group, but we can then start, you know, really trying to develop some strength qualities out of them, which happens their last year of schooling.
Yep.
So that it's the years we've done prior that allow us to then try and get that winning, like, I don't want to call it winning, but a bit more competition-based or training going on.
Harry, if we have to change tact a bit, last year was an exciting year for you. You worked with the National Rugby Union under 20s. I'm interested what you learned at Nudgee could you then take to a team that was preparing for a World Cup in Argentina? And then part B of that question is, what did you learn with the Junior Wallabies bringing back into the school? So let's go part A first. What did you feel prepared you well for a under 20 World Cup rugby tournament?
So you sort of broke up a little bit, but I'll just assume what I learned from Nudgee to take onto the 20s. So the big thing one thing I back myself on now is my coaching ability. Again, you still have doubts around your knowledge on certain topics, and you second guess yourself on that sort of stuff. That's why I went and did my master's degree. But the one thing that you do back yourself on is the amount of hours you've coached. And the one thing I backed myself on that was my ability to coach all different types of athletes, types of kids. Like, we had guys in that team that had already played Super Rugby and were on, 100, 200K a year, and being touted as the next big thing in the media. And then you've got guys who haven't made it yet and aren't on any money from their academies. They just get some shirts and boots, but they're talented young kids. So, 20-year-olds. So what I found is that sometimes that obviously the what can happen is when money gets involved, behaviours start to change. And so how do you deal with different types of characters? So one thing I found was that aspect, and how we navigate that. And that's probably the big thing and then some of the stuff is like just having to react on your feet. So we went to Argentina. Now we're trying to plan in gym sessions. We play every 4 days. And in Argentina, their siesta goes for about 4.5 hours. So when we're trying to plan gyms, the gym's completely shut. Everything's shut. There's, the only thing open is a Macca's. And then on a Sunday, as an example, like we're working on 4 days, so you don't really know what day of the week it is. You're just working on your game day +1, -1, whatever. On Sundays, everything shuts. Yep. And that includes gyms. So there was one day we sort of got into it and we're planning it, and then we got a phone call, and we didn't know that everything shut on a Sunday because we hadn't gone through a Sunday yet. But yeah, everything shut, and we had a gym session planned, and we couldn't get it done. Now in the end, it was just sort of thinking your feet. Now what can we do when you got no gym equipment, and you still want to provide that sort of stimulus. The boys want to keep that routine through those 4-day cycles.
So that's another example where you've got the science on one hand and what would be ideal, but I mean, this is a junior elite, if you want to call it that, program, and you're still having to think on your feet. And so tell us in that exact example, what were some of your strategies?
Yeah, so we just did, so at that point, most of our stuff was sort of a power-based session anyway. We're playing every 4 days. It's more of an activation, really getting them, excited, and get them, ready to go for the session, for the games. So what we did is we had lots of bands and things like that for our stretching and mobility sessions that we were doing all the time. So again, once you got a band, as probably everyone's starting to figure out pretty quickly, at the moment, you've got a fair bit of exercises you can do, and how we do that. And again, it actually turned out pretty well because you can get your push, you can get your pulls, you can get your bracing sort of exercises done, you can get your lower body jumps in, you can do those sorts of stuff. You can even do some of your acceleration mechanics. I thought I saw Stacey up there somewhere earlier. He'll know way more about this than I do, but so I guess for me it was just about trying to get the boys engaged a little bit, and how we did that was just through bands and through using partners and other sorts of stuff. So I think we were doing some we're doing squats with a prop on their back. So one of the guys jumped on his back, and we're doing some squats and trying to keep them active through that sense. And again, it kept them quite engaging, if I'm honest. The guys, they're rolling through every 4 days. They're getting pretty banged up, but it's something a bit more exciting and that sort of stuff. So not perfect, but that's what I thought Nudgy definitely brought, was that ability to think on your feet a bit, which happens.
And it goes back to your previous point about just getting coaching hours up, because you only get exposed to that through coaching a multitude of athletes in different environments, different facilities, different equipment available. And one of the things that we talk about in our internship is you really need to do that stuff and do it when you're young. And it's amazing how much that kind of stuff can prepare you for later on, when you would assume at a Rugby World Cup, even though it's under 20s, that all that stuff would be available. We find out it's
exactly right. Well, it was all planned for us. The World Rugby had said it was all good to go, and then we find out that the gym owner doesn't do that, and so it was all sort of planned. But again, plans change all the time. So as we're all going through right now. So I guess that was a big thing. And then I guess back to the other question on the reversal.
Yeah.
Is that what you're going to
know? Yep.
Yeah, on the reversal, it was interesting. Like what I sort of started to find out a bit more was the detail that is required at the next sort of level. Maybe not required, but is expected might be the better word. So they're expecting. So the detail of it is a lot greater than what it is at a school level.
Give us a couple of examples.
Well, let's just put it. Let's just go. The easy one is the GPS. So sort of have the expectation on, if a guy misses, 3 kilometers and 500 meters of high speed, they need to go do that. Where do we find that time? Whereas with us at Nudgy, if a kid misses, he's 2 kilometers short of a weekly load. It's not the end of the world. And I still agree that to an extent. Or if a guy's 2 kilometers over, the expectation is we're supposed to pull them from training. Now, I have sort of, I agree with some things and I disagree with a lot of other things, and I think we don't give athletes in Australia enough credit for how robust they actually are, or don't allow them to become robust enough.
Because of our pampering, and that's kind of
because of our pampering, and especially I found that was even more so at the next level.
Okay. And what do you think that the consequence is? Is that an Australian rugby union thing? Is that a working with now paid athletes, so everyone's using velvet gloves, or what do you think is underpinning that? Or do you think it's?
I think it's a little bit. Again, going back to that. I think I was talking about it, going back to that copycat sort of system. Yep. So a lot of these guys have seen what happens at the Wallabies, or seen what happened. They've gone on tours. Some of the coaching staff and some of the other staff have gone on these tours, and they pick up some incredible things. I sound like I'm kicking them, but there's some incredible things that they do with engagement and how they get players motivated and that sort of stuff, and the detail that their coaches put into their education for the players is unbelievable. But I also think that they see what happens at the Wallabies, and that means it has to happen at the under 20 junior Wallabies, or that has to happen at our under 19s or our schoolboys, and it's just not A, necessarily practical, and B, easy to do. So I just don't. Yeah, all required. So I guess that was one of the things that I thought was we overanalyzed and over-relied ourselves on what a GPS is for. In the end, it's to help us not make decisions and not doesn't dictate our decisions. It sort of helps us with our decision making, and it's just an element to it, not the only part. So that part I found was interesting. What I did do is I also found ways that you could use the GPS. On the other hand, ways you could use the GPS better in helping the coaches come up with better better drills, better exercise.
An example?
Well, an example is, so we did no straight line conditioning in throughout the whole time. It was a camp-based system, and so we went into camps and we had to get rugby content in, because the guys are learning all different systems and what have you. So what we had to do was put certain drills and target certain sessions and things like that. What's going to be a hard session? What's going to be a light session? What exercises can we use if it's a hard session? What exercises or what drills can we use if it's a heavy session? And how do we integrate that throughout the week in a camp-based system? And how do we do that throughout a cycle, a 4-day cycle, when we're at a World Cup? Mm-hmm. So that side was actually really good for me, and how that worked and how we communicate that with coaches. Yep. A lot of the time, the guys I currently work with here, I've got a really good relationship with them. I can tell them straight away, but I had to build that relationship again with these guys. Yep. We had 10 weeks, and I reckon it took me 7 or 8 weeks to feel comfortable coming to them when things weren't going right, and then also praising them when things were going well. So how do we do that? So I guess that for me was maybe the details, the extra little bit of details and that side of it required. And that was a big one for me, is how I can bring that back effectively. Because that's the other thing, is we can always get detail, but how do you actually use it effectively?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Because I think you can always bring back detail, but does that make sense? You can bring back detail, but it doesn't necessarily work.
100%. Now, guys, just another opportunity, because we're going to change tack one more time. So if you've got a question, Jared, Tom, Luke, Nikki, anyone, if you've got a question, please. Oh, there we go. Robbie's got a question for us, or for Harry. does anyone have any advice for modifying drills using rugby, for example, without the use of GPS monitors? How do we know if we're getting enough meters? How can you modify it once we know? So I suppose, Robbie, what you're asking is you want to apply some sports science. If you don't have access to that, Harry, do you have any suggestions on what you'd be looking at?
Yeah, so look, obviously it's impossible to know exactly what the meters are, and I don't think that's necessarily a massive thing. It's a luxury. But just being able to understand the manipulation of space and numbers and your drills. So if we open up a drill, so give them more space to run, they're going to pick up some more faster based running exercises. If we close the drill off, so make it smaller spaces, we know that they're going to, they might get a few more accelerations, they're going to get more touches on the ball, they're going to get a whole bunch of other little things. But the fast running and the total running will be down. So understanding how you can manipulate space, and space might be simply taking numbers out. So rather than having one drill, you've got the same drill being run twice. And then instantly you've given yourself some more space through there. I guess they're the two big ones that I use. And so again, it's always easier when you've got more coaches, because then you can have a number of drills running at the same time. Same drill, but done across a number of people, then the work to rest ratios are better. That's how I do that. But a simple sort of thing to follow is maybe, I'm not a massive fan of RPE. I just don't think we educate them well enough on it. And certainly with kids, they don't, even if you do educate on it, they forget it again. And then but it's a guide.
Another tool.
And a tool, and not a dictatorship, I guess. But something I use is just simply time, and trying to categorize my drills into open drills and closed drills. If it's something as simple as that, and you open, you might do the amount of time you've done in open drills and the amount of time you've done in closed drills, and trying to progress that side of it. That's sort of an easy way just to simplify it a bit, for things like club rugby and that side of it. That's what I've done in the past anyway.
So Harry, you've been at Nuggie coming on 6 years. Tell us, what's the next step for you? You've run a program, you've had a multi-sports, multi-athletes. We haven't even talked about your contribution to the swimming program, which is growing really well at Nuggie. What do you think is the next step for you? Where would you like to be?
Yeah, well, if you'd asked me this question probably 8 months ago, without a doubt, I would have gone professional sport at some level. I'm currently probably in a weird position now where I still think I want to at least experience it and try it and see, go to that level and work with the best athletes in the world. That does still excite me, but I just think the more time I'm in the school, the more I actually enjoy this age group to coach. Mm-hmm. There just isn't that baggage of other things going on, and they're just thirsty. Contracts, media, like the money involved. Like in the end, they're individual businesses inside the sporting programs. They're out for themselves. I find the ability to actually unite them all in a cohesive group is difficult. And then, and if you can do that well, you're generally onto a very good sort of system and team. And I think that's sort of where we've seen some success at other sporting, at long-term sporting clubs.
So you said this happened in the last 8 months. What's the evolution been, or what are the triggers been?
It's interesting. So probably being exposed to it a bit more through the under-20s. Mm-hmm. There was parts I loved with that program, and there was parts that I thought, well, that's actually not why I got into this industry. And I got in to try and help people, not to have an ego contest at times. Mm-hmm. I I love some of the guys I worked with. It was unbelievable. I learned an awful lot of most of those people I was with. But I just found that ego can sometimes drive a lot of decision making. And that's never why I got into this industry. I got into it because I love all types of sport, and then I love interacting with people and especially helping people grow in the sense of and achieve their goals a bit. So that's and sometimes it didn't necessarily always feel like that was the driving decision-making process behind the decisions. So again, I still want to try it. There's also the job volatility. As I get older and things like that, I start to see perspective on it a bit more. And like I've got a mortgage. How's that going to go if we all lose our job or what have you? Like, that doesn't necessarily excite me, that position. As much as, when I was younger, I was just fully all keen as like, I'll do whatever it takes sort of stuff. So that doesn't mean I don't want to do it. It just means I am now probably think about the decision before I'd put an application in. I think it would have to be on my terms, not necessarily on another, on the sporting team's terms. So what I mean by that, I guess, is they would have to want me, and I would have to want to go to them as well. Yeah. So it's not just a one-way street where I'll do anything to get to them. Does that make sense? I'll take massive breaks to get there.
One of the things, if anyone follows me on social media, I'll often say the best time to apply for a job is when you've got one. And that kind of encapsulates what you're saying there is right now you're comfortable, you're in a successful school, you've got autonomy, and you've got the decision-making power to run your program. And so, there's the ideal job needs to fit on multiple levels, not just because it's got a great logo. Financially, stability, control, input into the program, feedback, those suddenly become a lot more important. So it is a valuable lesson, and it's interesting that's happened in the last 8 months.
It's interesting, and as I said, like it's just a weird sort of time because it's a little bit like I've always come in going, I want to work with elite athletes, and it's just, and again, it hasn't gone. That's definitely not like there's still that hunger and drive to do that. But it's just not leading every one of my decisions now, which is what it probably did, I said before 8 months ago. And just little things like spending more time at home, and getting that, like that's now becoming more of a priority as well. And then, spending 60, 70 hours working, like that doesn't, like, although I love what I do, it does put a strain on other things. So, and you don't get to enjoy other areas as much as you probably want to. So, and there are other aspects to life outside of working.
Yes, 100%. All right, Harry. Well, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to leave it just before we cut off. Guys, Luke, anyone, Tom, if there's anyone got another question that they want to ask Harry before we sign off? Stace, have you got a question back there?
Not him. That's a hard question.
Stace, tough question?
No, I'll catch up with you soon, Harry.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Tom? All good? Okay. Jared, have you got any...
Harry and I talk pretty often, so cover most bases. So that's all good.
All right, Tess. Oh, Tess is thinking. Charles, another question. I thought that was a pretty good question that Charles asked. Tess, you got something? No?
No, not yet.
Okay. All right. Lukey? All right, Charles.
I might just expand on it quickly. In terms of like the collaboration with elite pathway programs and things like that, like you've obviously got your, what you see a nudgy college year 12 graduate out of the first 15 program looking like, in terms of like, right, well, you know, like you said, what do we want them to be able to do? We want them to be able to do a loaded push-up or whatever. Have you ever found that you've been in a situation where that's almost, and that's very much a development pathway, which I really like. And something that I've seen a lot is that a lot of elite pathway programs probably forget the pathway stuff and go straight to the elite side of things. And have you ever had clashes in that sense? And how have you navigated it from an interpersonal perspective with whatever program it may be?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you say that. When I first came to the role, probably about a year and a half after I came into the role, we used to get a lot of guys getting injured out of the program, like especially lots of shoulder problems, so requiring shoulder surgery and that sort of stuff. Now we can debate why that is. Like, we're just throwing way too much gym around, or is their tackle technique poor, or whatever from a rugby perspective. And I had a bit of a heated discussion with a guy who ended up being the head coach of the Junior Wallabies 5 years later. So again, and it was a constructive discussion, because he was at the time looking after he was the head of the Reds Academy, head coach of the Reds Academy, and he was asking why we're getting so many injuries coming through, and what are we doing to try and fix it? And it actually was quite a constructive, although it was heated at the beginning, it was actually quite a constructive end of the conversation. And so the answer is yes, I've had some discussions, some conflicts around that. But then it was also, the main thing was actually me going out there and asking what they want from the academies. So at least engaging in that conversation. So in the end, I think a lot of them, they just want an athlete that they can start working with straight away. And they don't, but then they also want them to be really strong. And they want them to be at this level, you know, but as you said, the development process is different, right? So, you know, they say they just want, they say they just want a guy that can move well, but then they actually want a guy that can be, the guys they pick are also very strong in that aspect. So what I've sort of did is after I sort of spoke to everyone, I collated sort of a general theme of what they wanted. And then I just sort of implemented that and just regressed it all the way down through our development programs. So the big main messages were they want them to be able to squat well, they want them to be able to run, and with some basic sort of mechanics. And I'm talking about court sports, not court sports, field sports at the moment. So they want them to be able to run well, they want them to be able to be squat well, push well, chin well, and basically just the usual stuff we've all spoken about. And then so I just regressed it all the way down, and how do we get our guys to that without rushing? And it's interesting because I haven't had too many. I've had no other negative discussions since that original one, and that's across a lot of different programs. So the ones I do get, actually, that's a lot. I had one the other day from the Raw, from the Brisbane Raw, who were telling us that we had to stop two of our guys training because he red flagged on a wellness questionnaire. Now, to me, that's a big problem with kids, right? We're trying to create wellness. We're trying to create well-rounded, robust individuals that are exposed to things. Now, the thing is that no one was playing at that point in time. It was all a bit different. It was all.
Can I jump in on this one?
Yeah,
as well?
Nikki got on. Nikki was the one that got this question.
So yeah, like our head of football has a lot of communication, and I guess this is going back to Charles's question earlier. Has a lot of communication with like Raw Academy and like Brisbane City and a lot of the other clubs, because plenty of our guys will train with them like 6 times a week, but then still have to be available to train with us as well. So yeah, they were contacting us saying that a couple of their athletes flagged on their AMS. But we also do like wellness questionnaires, and they weren't flagging on ours, or they were filling it out straight after our training session. So of course they were going to flag on there. So I guess it comes back to something where communication needs to be a little bit better sometimes between the two, which is always going to be a problem when everyone's got competing demands.
And then furthering on from that, so then what we did is we went and spoke to them and just gave them a phone call. And we find that often once you call them, it tends to diffuse the conversation, I guess the situation a lot better, and then they provide some context. And the big one I think Grant mentioned the other day is earlier are we being data driven, or are we being like coaching skills, using our coaching eye to make our decisions? And I think like the amount of times I've had kids go, "Oh, I just pressed the wrong button on the wellness questionnaire," and then so there's big like red flags going everywhere, and they're just going, "Oh, sorry, I just pressed the wrong button. I'm feeling really good." Or you ask a follow-up question, "Oh, what you look pretty sore. What's going on?" He's like, "No, I feel really good." So it actually doesn't match what they're saying in their wellness stuff. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but I guess from our perspective, the way I go about diffusing a situation will be getting on the phone and actually talking with the person, not trying to fire back an email. And what I've done is I've reached out to all the clubs, or not necessarily clubs, but the representative pathways. So the Reds, the Raw, the Broncos, whatever, and QAS, whatever that is, and found out what they actually want, and then try to implement it into our programs. And I regress it all the way back down to our under 13s, under 14s, under 15s, all the way through, whatever it is. So that, I'm not sure if that really answers your question, Charles, but I guess that's sort of how I've gone about those sort of situations. Does that sort of help?
Yeah, it does. So it's probably a pretty shit question, because it's something that, like, if you had the answer, you'd be, running the show. But yeah, it does in terms of what your process for solving those issues. Yeah.
And it's different for everyone. Like, so in the end, you can't please everyone. So you've got to I try and please, not please, but I just try and find a medium ground. Like an example is, right, a lot of places want us to be able to do Olympic lifts. And they want us to, when they come out of grade 12, we want them to be able to hit, do Olympic lift cleans, go straight into the full snatch. But as I sort of mentioned, there's often we're training 40 guys at once, and that's not always practical. So what we try and do is we might add in variations. So they might only ever get to the clean pull, a basic sort of variation on it. So that's sort of where we will go, and I won't ever teach them the actual catch part of the clean. But just because there's too many people going on, and if I turn my back on a clean, who knows or a snatch, who knows what's going to happen. But the idea there is just to, I don't try and do everything, but I try and do as much as actually possible inside our environment. And again, it all just comes back to having a conversation with them and utilising those coffee chats. And
so, Harry, one key thing, like you started off saying that, often sometimes you might ignore the science to build the culture and the soft skills. When you're talking about the under 20s, you talked about how important the relationship was at Nudgy, where you've been for 6 years compared to a 10-week program, and the conversation there. And that's, again, the relationships between you and other coaches. So it's you and athletes, you and other coaches, and then in this case with other programs. And it becomes pretty obvious that we need to really work on that relationship and communication, the softer skills, because there's three examples. You dealing with the athletes, you dealing with coaches, and you dealing with external program providers. Without the relationship, the athlete ends up suffering. If you stick too much to the sports science, if you don't have that relationship with the coaches, and likewise, if you don't have that relationship with the athletes the programs that your athletes will be going into. Just got a quick question from Nick here. First, something from Luke for Harry. We've had a huge influence not only on professional athletes, as well as a number of strength and conditioning coaches have come through and left the program. Have you reflected on how far you've come as a coach? and your impact to the sporting and strength and conditioning community. 30 seconds on that, Harry?
Not really, because I think I should do that better. But I think our nature, especially in Australia, is not to reflect on necessarily the positives you do. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, but it's, yeah, I would say I definitely haven't done that very well, because I still think, and just naturally, I don't think what I've done is any better than what other people have done. It's, I just try and help the people that are there in front of me, and if they're the kind of guys that want help or and are driven to do it and have those energetic qualities and that proactiveness, then I find it's very easy for me to do that because they're self-motivated and driven to do it. So a lot of the time I I haven't reflected much on that, if I'm honest.
We've got a question from Nick. Nick's exact question is nothing specific. I was just going to ask one thing Harry would recommend to all coaches in the industry. For example, a book or a course that you would recommend as professional development or the next step from this conversation. What would you recommend coaches do?
And it's probably just a theme of the month at the moment for me, because in my role, I've found I've had to develop leadership skills without really knowing it, and communication skills and organisation skills, and I've had what I've found, what I think is very underutilized is actually things like sales, is like understanding how to sell things, whether that's sell a kid that's overweight, the gym, how do you sell in the gym? How do you sell different things? Now I'm terrible at it. I'm absolutely shocking, but it's something for me that I'm really keen to work on, is that side, and not using selling as a negative word, is actually having that as, like, in the end, that's what we're trying to do. We're constantly selling things in our space. But then also leadership skills. I'm looking into things at the moment as how I develop my leadership stuff. So, that's an area for me that I really want to keep working on. I don't think I do it necessarily well enough, is that leadership side. So that's what I want to, for me, that's an area that a lot of S&Cs neglect. But I think before all of that, you need to learn to just coach people. I think that's a few steps down the line, but I think coaching as many people as you can is the big thing. As I said, it's the one thing that helped me, that I felt that I could really bring when I went up the next level into that. I shouldn't call that next level, but when I went to working with older athletes who up the pay scale, was my ability to coach.
Awesome. Harry, thanks so much for your time, and thanks to everyone else who attended. Guys, tomorrow we've got the next one coming up is Daniel Cooper. Massive history in the military. Then he went to Super Rugby. He's now got his own business, and a great guy to catch up with. So if you're interested in, let's call it mental toughness, if you're interested in mindset, he is fantastic. So tune in tomorrow. If you go to propelperform.com/events, so propelperform.com/events, you'll be able to see and join us next time. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.